Before we started, Piyush just told us that 52 degrees Celsius has been recorded in India, and we are likely to have a really, really hot summer. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much, and we are looking forward to catching up with time and having fun today as we discuss the role of oversight institutions in the just energy transition conversation. It's a great pleasure to host you today. This is the fourth webinar we are having in our energy governance webinar series, and we look forward to working with you today as we navigate this very exciting subject. We have a very, very exciting panel today, and shortly we'll be introducing them to you. Feel free to engage with them, share your thoughts on this subject, share with us examples of how you are navigating the just energy transition and how oversight institutions are making it work, or how they could actually facilitate it work better. My name is Geoffrey Omedo. I'm the Knowledge Community Manager, Sustainable Energy in UNDP. Thank you very much. And without much ado, allow me to bring in UNDP's Director of the Sustainable Energy Hub, Mr. Riyad Medeb, to give his brief opening remarks as we start navigating this subject. And maybe as Riyad is coming in, one very stark reality we are facing is rising temperatures. Before we started, Piyush just told us that 52 degrees Celsius has been recorded in India, and we are likely to have a really, really hot summer this year. And these are the realities we are seeing. Temperatures going up, the records is likely to be beaten. And the subject now is really, is the just energy transition going to effectively deal with the challenges that we are tackling? So Riyad, over to you as you set us off in today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey, and thank you, colleagues and discussant, and for joining us for this fourth session on energy governance. And I'm very happy that we are organizing it today. It's going to be a brief, on my side, introduction in order to have fun with the facilitation done by Piyush. I'd like to welcome to the culminating session of our webinar series on energy governance. And today we will tackle a critical pillar of sustainable energy system, appropriate and independent oversight. And this session comes at the time when the world still sees over 675 million people without access to electricity and a significant reliance on fossil fuel, which make up approximately 80 to 82% of our global energy mix. Why focus on oversight? And that is a very important question, and we will learn a lot from our discussant. Because without it, there is no accountability, transparency, and fairness in how our energy resources are managed. Oversight agencies, from Parliament to judicial authorities, ensure that energy policies are not only effective, but equitable and inclusive. Let me share some inspiring instances of oversight making a real difference. In Ukraine, UNDP has aided parliamentary members in drafting green legislations and enhancing policy visibility, ensuring that sustainable practices are at the forefront of the governmental agendas. Across Asia, our efforts have bolstered transparency in public procurement, crucial in preventing fraud and promoting fair resources allocation, impacting up to 20% of the region's GDP. In Latin America, through the promotion of Escazú Agreement, we are setting a global standard for integrated environmental rights into energy policies. Even through UNDP, we are very proud of those examples. Let me say it clearly, it is not enough. For this reason, we intend to scale up our work in the future. And let me share with you some of the innovative action we are taking. We are working with countries to adopt and implement advanced digital tools for real-time monitoring and evaluation for energy projects. For instance, UNDP can facilitate partnership with tech companies to develop blockchain solutions for tracking energy transactions and ensuring compliance with environmental and social governance standards. This will not only improve transparency, but also enhance the efficiency of regulatory process. In addition, UNDP is working to establish specialized forums that bring together government, regulators, private sector leaders, and civil society. And this forum would focus on creating actionable plans for integrated sustainable practices across all phases of energy project lifespan. Today, I invite each of you to engage deeply, share your insight, and collaborate on innovative solutions. And our distinguished speakers will share their expertise on enhancing oversight capacities to meet the challenges of the energy transition. Thank you, and I look forward to our fruitful discussion. Geoffrey, to you. And let's have fun now.
Thank you very much, Riyad. And I think you've already set the ball rolling and really, really well as well. So, Piyush, over to you as you facilitate and also introduce to us our panelists for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Riyad, and thanks, Geoffrey. Thank you, Riyad, for really bringing the very diverse example in terms of, oversight agencies' role, highlighting the importance of oversight into this just energy transition that we are talking about. We have got a fantastic panel today to go deeper into this role and importance of oversight agencies, really looking at from a systemic lens. What we are talking about is energy governance that we need to look at, bring a system thinking approach, because the challenges that we are facing are interconnected, and the interconnected challenges need systemic solutions. So that's why we have got this fantastic panel, 5 different speakers bringing different perspectives. So we have got this panel today. We are we are still waiting for our Honorable Weben William, who is the Member of Parliament from Seychelles and the President of the Interparliamentary Union Committee on Sustainable Development. So I hope he joins in a few minutes. Then we have Gay Ordonez, who is the Director Asia and Global Lead on Anti-Corruption from Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. Thank you for being here, Gay. We have got Mandeep Tiwana, who is the Chief Officer, Evidence and Engagement from Civicus. Thank you, Mandeep, for joining us today. And then we have Nina Campbell, who is the Global Energy Lead at the Consumers International. Thank you, Nina, for joining us. And finally, we have Raz Singh, who is the Managing Partner at the Trans India Law Associates, and he is also an advocate for the Appellate Tribunal for Electricity and the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission for India. So thank you, Ross, for joining us. And now, without taking much time, because as Riyad said, we want to have fun, right? And to have fun, I would like to directly go to the speakers to discuss the role of oversight agencies. Gay, I would like to go to you first. And you are a global lead for anti-corruption, and EITI has been working for a long time, especially in the extractive industry sector. And also now we are talking about this renewable energy, and I think that's also very capital intensive. How we saw in the extractive industry, renewable energy is also a lot of money is flowing. Just to highlight a number, I am seeing that in 2023, renewable energy spending was around $1.8 trillion. And according to the latest IEA number, we are expecting $4.5 trillion by 2030 to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees C. So from 1.8 trillion to 4.5 trillion, huge kind of amount of money is going to flow. And of course, that is there is a risk of corruption into this renewable energy sector. So my question to you is, what are the emerging issues that you are seeing in the renewable energy sector? What are the new corruption practices, maybe behaviors, that are emerging? And maybe you can talk about the top 3 challenges and what are the EITI? Because I know EITI is also working in this now renewable energy sector. There are new standards and new guidelines are coming from EITI. So what are the recommendations you have, for bringing these anti-corruption practices? Over to you, Gay.
Thank you very much, Piyush, and I hope you can hear me well. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to share our insights on this very important topic. As you mentioned, my organization, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, we have been working on transparency and accountability, mainly in the extractive sector. But in recent years, we have also been increasing our focus on the energy transition, because we have seen that some of the risks that we have observed in the extractive sector tend to replicate themselves in the energy transition. And the reason for that is, as you have said, there is an expectation that the demand for transition minerals, these are the minerals that are essential in building renewable energy technologies and infrastructure, such as solar panels or electric vehicles, for example. The ramping up the production of this would also necessitate an increase in the production of transition minerals such as lithium, graphite, cobalt, and nickel. So as I've said, what we have observed is that the corruption risks that we have seen whenever there is a boom in the demand for mining are the same risks that we are seeing as emerging now that we are moving towards energy transition. You mentioned some estimates from IEA earlier on. Let me just complement that. They also estimate that for us to be able to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement, it could require a fourfold increase in the supply of minerals for clean energy technologies. And for some of these minerals, demand growth could be as much as 900%. So imagine how huge, the scale of that increase in demand that we are facing right now. And so as governments are considering how to promote mining, a key risk relates to the awards of licenses and contracts. As producers scramble to find mineral deposits and bring new mines into production, companies may try to offer bribes to influence approvals, and elites may put pressure on officials to cut corners in consultations with communities for mining operations, in impact assessments, and due diligence processes. So these are the top three risks that we are looking at right now, related to licensing, related to due diligence process and being expedited, and also related to shortcutting of procedures for impact assessments. Other business opportunities can also be at risk. For example, procurement can be vulnerable to corruption, especially in contexts where companies are under pressure to meet local content requirements. So as we know, whenever a mining project is starts operation, sometimes there are agreements for suppliers to come from the local communities. But this could be an opportunity for corrupt practices as well among local government officials. And similarly, commodity trading deals, particularly when they involve state-owned enterprises, can also be corruption hotspots. We are seeing a pattern of state-owned enterprises increasing their participation in mining projects, obviously in an attempt to get or collect more revenues. But unfortunately, governance of some state-owned companies are not very progressive or very transparent, and therefore that could also pose a lot of corruption risks. So far I have mentioned risks related to supplying the minerals that are necessary for renewable energy resources. Let me now come to corruption risks that relate specifically to oversight on the renewable energy sector itself. And again, let me provide some context. At COP28, more than 120 countries pledged to triple renewables by 2030. And according to IEA, renewables are expected to account for over 90% of global electricity capacity expansion between 2022 and 2027. And there's an estimated annual investment of around $5 trillion in the sector by 2030 to meet the net zero goals. So the risk accompanying a shift of this scale and urgency are a cause for concern. Large flows of financing, rapid scale-up in investment, and expectation of higher returns can generate corruption and integrity risks. And as I've said, these concerns bear similarities to the issues we have seen in the extractive sector. The risks can be grouped into three major categories. First is on the institutional and regulatory gaps, inadequate community engagement, and project implementation and operational risks. And each category presents challenges that can undermine the integrity and success of the renewable energy sector. There could be regulatory loopholes that enable developer collusion and conflicts of interest in auctions and contract awards. to local level social and environmental harms that foster community mistrust and project abandonment, and to corruption risk in overcoming administrative bottlenecks. So what we are doing in EITI is we are trying to work with countries, 56 countries right now are implementing our standard. And we are trying to promote transparency in all the stages of the extractive sector value chain to make sure that all the information and data regarding the production of minerals, specifically transition minerals, are transparent to enable more scrutiny whether the legal and regulatory frameworks are being followed, whether there are areas in the governance of these minerals that are vulnerable to risks, whether there are loopholes in the regulations, and more importantly, whether the revenues that are being collected from the production of these minerals really flow to the citizens and benefit the communities that they are supposed to benefit. I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for really highlighting this different forms of corruption and also the different hotspots that you're talking about. And also you highlighted like two different. One is definitely the critical mineral area that you're talking about, and how much demand is increasing in that sector. And that is also, there is a risk of corruption. And then this, the renewable energy itself, the oversight that is needed. So thank you for this initial reflection on the corruption risks in the energy, with the renewable energy sector. With that, I would like to go to Mandeep. Mandeep, you really, I think you also come from a very strong human rights background. And I think that is another area that we are looking at when we are talking about energy governance for a just energy transition. Apart from these anti-corruption agencies, there is a strong role of the human rights institutions they have to play to ensure that the transition is fair, just, and inclusive. There are a lot of conversation also around that this energy transition is it's also risk causing harms to people's human rights. There are a lot of new issues emerging, especially deepening the human rights issues faced by the frontline communities, like we are talking about indigenous people rights, for example, right? So my question to you is, from supply chain, to access to energy, to indigenous people rights, to workers' rights, there are different aspects of this when we are talking about human rights. In what ways do human rights institutions monitor and address the impact of energy policies? And what are the interventions, some of the interventions that may have been successful or maybe failed, and there is some learning, for our audience today? And maybe before that, you want to talk a bit about Civicus, what is the role of, just to introduce the organization for our audience. Over to you, Mandeep.
Thank you, Piyush, and thank you to UNDP for hosting this webinar on this really important subject. And I'm really glad to be on this panel with such eminent colleagues. A little bit about Civicus. So I'm Chief of Evidence and Engagement at Civicus. We're a global civil society alliance dedicated to strengthening civil society action and citizen participation around the world. We work, in all continents through our member and partner organizations, with usually human rights and social justice oriented groups. On your question about human rights institutions and their role in supporting a just transition, I think their role is absolutely critical, because human rights institutions in their diversity, that is national human rights commissions, equality commissions, women's commissions, minority commissions, and so on, really provide this added layer of accountability on behalf of the people. But for them to be able to do their job properly, human rights institutions need to be independent, they need to be well-resourced, and they also need to have a strong mandate, which is in line with the Paris Principles, which have been mandated by the United Nations. So they've been around for some time. Now, there's three ways that national human rights institutions can support a just transition. One is they offer very important aid and advice to the government on how to enable a just transition that leaves no one behind. The second is that they are also able to review and receive complaints and are able to make recommendations to the government much faster ways than the regular court system can do. And the third is that they also play a very important role in societies in enabling a human rights culture in societies, in getting people to be more aware of the rights of particularly marginalized and excluded peoples. So they help keep that in mind. So an interesting example of a national human rights institution that really connects with the global framework is actually the work of the Danish Institute of Human Rights. In fact, they did a study where they evaluated the standards contained in the Sustainable Development Goals and actually connected them to over 90% of the commitments under the International Human Rights Framework. So there's making those connections with the International Human Rights Framework is absolutely critical role that national human rights institutions can play. But for national human rights institutions to be effective, they also need to work closely with civil society organizations. As we know, civil society organizations play a critical role in our societies in ensuring that there's inclusive policy making, there's innovations to complex development challenges, and also to ensure transparency, accountability, and participation in public life. Unfortunately, civil society organizations around the world are facing a huge civic space challenges. In fact, in our work at Civicus, in measuring civic space conditions around the world, we found that over 85% of the world's population lives in countries with very seriously disenabling conditions for civil society. That means there are laws that prevent international funding from flowing free to civil society organizations. There's persecution of civil society actors, human rights defenders, when they expose high-level corruption. I'm sure Gay can relate with that. And there's also all sorts of bureaucratic requirements that are put on civil society organizations to prevent them from doing their work in advancing constitutional principles, values, and the international framework. And this remains a huge challenge around the world. So here I would say that the UN's guidance on civic space, which was put in place in 2020 and followed the UN Secretary General's call to action on human rights, can provide a very useful template. The guidance calls for three key principles in it. First is protection of human rights defenders. So guidance includes a responsibility on all UN agencies and those who work with them to ensure that those who speak truth to power, those who advance transformative change in societies, they are adequately protected, and those who persecute them are held accountable. The second is to ensure promotion of civic space and civil society rights. So that is, legislation and policies should be enabling to ensure the robust participation of civil society actors. And the third is participation. So that is, civil society is invited into key meetings, into key policy discussions, including through advisory boards and so on. And we have seen that there is great value when civil society works along with national human rights institutions, parliaments, and the executive branch of government. So, for instance, in recent years in the Gambia, civil society organizations worked with parliament in putting in place a right to information law in the country. And freedom of information legislation, as we all know, it really helps advance just transition, helps ensure that there's no one is left behind, and also remains a most potent tool to address corruption in all segments of governance. So that's one positive example. But also, as I mentioned, because of serious civic space challenges around the world, we also need proper human rights defenders frameworks to ensure that persecution of human rights defenders, attacks against civil society organizations are properly investigated. So Mongolia put in place a human rights defenders framework, which includes laws and policies and supportive actions to ensure an enabling environment for civil society. But most importantly, the big challenge that we face now is that the right to peaceful assembly is coming under attack in many, many parts of the world. It is through this right to peaceful assembly that decolonization was achieved. It is through the right to peaceful assembly that the civil rights movement was able to make so many gains on racial justice. It's through the right to peaceful protest that people are able to expose corruption, to stand up against misgovernance, to advance gender justice, and the Fridays for Future movement by young people really has brought us to this juncture where we are in policy level spaces talking about the importance of making that just transition and the importance of ensuring that our economies, our societies are not harming the prospects of life for future generations. So that is a very important right which we all need to enable, and human rights institutions, civil society, and governments respect essentially for the right to peaceful protest is absolutely critical to ensure that these transitions are just. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mandeep. Thanks for very clearly highlighting this. You talked about the independence and the well-resourced and the mandate of the human rights institution. I think those are the three really, really critical aspects. And also, I like your 3P kind of framework: the protection of human rights defenders, the promotion of the civic space, and the participation by the people. So that I think that also needs empowerment, right? Empowering people with maybe creating awareness about the human rights issues and human rights framework. You talked about the UN call to action kind of framework. So I think there is also a lot of empowerment need to be done. Thank you for this fantastic initial remark. Now I would like to go to talking about the role of consumer commissions, and we have Nina here. Coming from this Consumer International, so really bringing a global perspective because they have a strong membership of national consumer commissions who are working with this Consumer International. And consumer kind of centric energy system we are talking about, right? When we are talking about this energy transition, consumers are really willing to participate in the energy transition. They are understanding the issue. And when they're willing to participate, they're also looking for what are the choices of energy supply. With this, now Riyad talked about this role of digital into this energy system. The digital is coming into this space. When consumers are engaging, there are new issues emerging from the privacy issues, the security issues with the digital lens. So a lot of consumer empowerment and the protection discussion going on. And I wanted to come to you, Nina, to when we are talking about this, putting consumers at the center of this energy transition, I think Consumer International really takes a kind of consumer journey approach in the energy system. And so I wanted to ask you, what are the new issues you are seeing when we are talking about this, the whole consumer journey approach into this energy transition? What will be some of the consequences if Consumer Commission lack the capacity and empowerment to deal with these issues? So if you can reflect on some of the challenges, I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Piyush, for the introduction. Really honoured to be here, part of this discussion today, because certainly this topic is front and centre for the work we do at Consumers International. But for those of you who aren't familiar with us yet, a little bit of an overview of the organisation. So Consumers International is a global membership organisation, and we represent consumer advocacy groups from around the world. So we bring together over 200 member organisations in more than 100 countries, and all of our members are working to empower and champion the rights of consumers everywhere. So we're bringing the voice of those members at national level to discussions at international level. We have the honour of holding general consultative status at the United Nations. So we're representing that voice at decision-making events and negotiations beyond the UN as well, at the World Energy Council, the World Economic Forum, the OECD, and so on. And it's worth noting that it was actually following a campaign by Consumers International that the UN guidelines on consumer protection were established in 1985. And then more recently, we've been working on updates to those guidelines, including recognising access to clean energy as a key consumer need in terms of the guidelines. So we work across nine core areas in terms of sustainable consumption, digital rights and safety, fair digital finance, but certainly energy is the topic of the day in terms of sustainable consumption for us. And essentially we're working for two key things. We're working for consumer protection and consumer empowerment in the context of the energy transition. And actually, the way that we think about it is that we're advocating for a fast, fair, and accountable energy transition. And as you mentioned, just fundamentally looking for more recognition of the crucial role that consumers are playing or should be playing in the transition to clean energy. And we're all aware of SDG 7, obviously committing countries to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable energy for all by 2030. And unfortunately, we're aware that this goal is looking currently a long way from being achieved. And what we'd say is that the key reason for this challenge that we're facing is that the largest economic group, consumers, has actually been neglected significantly in the development of climate mitigation strategies and clean energy strategies. It's helpful to remember that households make up they're making around 20% of the investments in clean energy right now. We expect that to increase significantly. We've heard some of the numbers already mentioned. And the IPCC has estimated that changes in energy use behaviour at the household level, so making changes to how we travel, how we eat, and how we heat and cool and power our homes in particular, could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by between 40 and 70% by 2050. So we know there's a huge role to play for consumers, but their needs are not being considered often enough. They're not being put at the centre. And designing projects, renewable energy projects, for example, without consumers involved from the start is one of the key reasons that is slowing the energy transition. So poorly thought through projects, and Gay mentioned this, projects that are trying to provide a technical solution but fail to take into account the opportunity to maximise social benefit, or that then threaten to adversely affect community well-being and livelihoods. That's when public opposition comes up and our objectives start to be threatened. So, you asked about some of the challenges that are facing energy consumers within the energy transition right now. Absolutely, number one is the pressure of high energy prices. So obviously we've been facing an energy price crisis since at least 2022, and energy consumers around the world in both developed and developing economies are under huge pressure from that. So millions of people can barely access or afford enough energy to meet their basic needs. We know that really remains number one issue for us. So affordability and a really urgent need to do better at identifying the most vulnerable consumers and best ways to protect them. In terms of access to clean energy and clean cooking solutions, it's obviously an issue that a lot of people are working on. From the consumer perspective, our members are thinking about, can we make sure that the solutions that are being rolled out to meet those targets around energy access, are they truly meeting consumers' needs in each application? So this includes ensuring adequate support is given for long-term maintenance of the systems that are being delivered out to people, but also redress. Is there a redress for when those systems fail or they don't work as expected? So we're working really hard to make sure that we're not just clipping the ticket in terms of reaching access targets or how many people have received a new piece of equipment, but actually make sure that the solutions are meaningful, making a meaningful improvement on the lives of people who are affected. You mentioned the approach that we think about in Consumers International. We've recently published a report on clean energy futures, which took a look at the issues for consumers from the perspective of the consumer purchase journey, which is a really interesting way of looking at it, we think. So from that perspective, there are sort of three phases of the journey where our members and Consumers International attempt to engage to assist consumers and protect their rights. So 3 phases are pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase. So in terms of pre-purchase, it's about improving consumer awareness and understanding not only the need for getting on board with the clean energy transition, but also the opportunities that are there for them, the meaningful benefit that's in it, and actually what are the options. And also making sure that there is good market availability and an equitable level for suitable, safe and affordable options for people to get involved and participate in the transition. Obviously, at the point of purchase is really about removing barriers to investment. Usually that's around pricing, and certainly there's a role for governments here in terms of developing subsidies and programs that can assist the lowest income consumers to participate and to make those upfront investments, which are usually the huge barrier that stops people from then accessing the long-term value of clean energy opportunities. And then finally, post-purchase. So I mentioned it already, the issues of maintenance and redress to make sure that these new clean energy technologies are actually safe and effective for users. So a lot of our members are working on testing new products, helping consumers to compare prices and performance of different products, and particularly as a lot of new demand-side technologies come through. A lot of new types of technologies and capabilities that our members are grappling with to help consumers grapple with. So I would just say as well, talking about the future energy system. So these new technologies in the future energy system, the old top-down model is going to give way to a world where consumers are playing. They're not just passive receivers of power, of electricity or energy. They're actually active participants in power generation, or they're a key resource in terms of load management. And all of this is interconnected with smart devices, new technology and gadgets that ultimately rely on people to operate them and understand how to operate them. So we also see that as a part of our role, that's helping consumers to upskill for that future. So we have a dual challenge. On one side, we're helping consumers through present difficulties, affordability, also resilience, particularly in the context of climate issues and conflict. But on the other hand, we're trying to enable a rapid transition and help people to participate in that with confidence. So a lot going on there. I'd be happy to dive into that in more detail.
The consumer needs and how we need to put at the center, but also I think there is an there is an understanding we need to develop, on the some kind of needs assessment, because also it's fast changing technologies and consumers are actively engaging and adopting those technologies. So I think there is also a needs assessment that need to be done. You also I like that, how did you talk about the consumer journey in terms of pre-purchase, the purchase and the post-purchase, and there is a role of the government and of this independent institutional in terms of consumer redressal mechanism and all that you talked about. So really helpful. Thank you for that. And now, finally, I would like to go to Raz. Before that, I would make a request here to our audience, please post your questions after this intervention from our final speaker. We would like to take your questions, respond to your queries. So Raz, over to you now. So you really come from a completely different lens. You come from a law background, and I think you have written several books on energy laws in India, and you have a kind of great understanding of the judicial system, coming from, as I said, from law background. So I think I wanted to understand from your perspective, how do you see the role of independent electricity regulatory commissions? For example, we have appellate tribunal in India, or maybe you can talk about what role they play, what kind of a structure, how their independence is maintained, and how their role is changing with this energy transition, because I understand the organization has been working for a long time, right? But now, and when we are talking about energy transition, how their role is changing, what are the new issues, and if you have any successful impact example that our audience from other countries can learn.
So 4 magical words are there. If you implement these 4 magical words, you can do energy transition across the world. So I will tell you best practice of India, which India is doing, implementing as of now when we are talking to each other. And the 4 magical words, first word is renewable purchase obligation. Second magical word is renewable generation obligation. Third magical word is renewable energy certificate. And fourth magical word is renewable consumption obligation. So if you understand these 4 words and if you implement these 4 words, it will become super easy for you to move forward any country in the world. So first magical word is renewable purchase obligation. So in the year 2003, we had an act called Electricity Act 2003 in India, which provided that Independent Regulatory Commission, Electricity Regulatory Commission, will implement renewable purchase obligation. Simply it means that any electricity distribution company or any captive power consumer or major consumers, they have to purchase certain percentage of renewable energy, compulsory, no if, no but. If it is not purchased, then there are penalties. So what happens? Energy transition becomes easier. But there was one challenge. The challenge was that, okay, all right, I am making it mandatory for the electricity distribution companies to purchase solar power, hydropower or wind power, but somebody has to generate it. If it is no generation, then how do we, purchase renewable energy? So second magical word comes, that is renewable generation obligation. So there was a policy framework which is called National Tariff Policy, which has been amended in 2022. It provides that anybody who is generating electricity from thermal sources, he has to generate additional electricity 40% in megawatt terms from renewable energy sources, compulsory renewable energy generation. So you have that jigsaw puzzle is being solved. So first we have renewable purchase obligation implemented, announced by Regulatory Commission and enforced by Regulatory Commission. Then the second puzzle, fits in renewable generation obligation, where any thermal company or any company which is using fossil fuels to produce electricity, 40% in megawatt terms, it has to create additional generation capacity for generating renewable energy. So this puzzle is being solved. But there was another problem. The challenge was that certain states in India, they said that we don't have so much of land to produce solar energy. So how do we, fulfill the renewable purchase obligation? So then third magical words comes in, and this is called renewable energy certificate. It is like a carbon market. Okay, so we have 29 states in India. Every state has a regulatory commission, which is called, you just add the name of the state and then State Electricity Regulatory Commission, which is mandating that renewable purchase obligation, that much of electricity you have to purchase from renewable sources. And now the State Electricity Regulatory Commission says, okay, thermal power companies are also mandated to produce 40% of their megawatt capacity from renewable, so you don't have dearth. But then, if in particular state or particular region, a company is unable to get renewable energy, then no problems. We will create a carbon market, which is called renewable energy certificate. You go to the power exchanges, and in the power exchanges you can purchase the renewable energy certificates. Brilliant. So we have a power exchange in India, and anybody, if he is unable to purchase solar directly, go to power exchange and purchase renewable energy certificate. But there was another challenge. So the challenge was that India is a federal country. So there are 2 sets of government. One is central government and one is state government. And every state has a State Electricity Regulatory Commission. All right. So what happens when you change the state? The renewable purchase obligation changes. Every state will have their own 29 renewable purchase obligation, and some states maybe regulatory commissions are very lax. They will say, okay, we will maybe implement it later on, or maybe lower level. So in 2022, Government of India, they amended Energy Conservation Act, second act. And what they said, we will have unified target. And there comes the fourth pillar or fourth magical word, which is called renewable consumption obligation. Now net is wider. Earlier it was renewable purchase obligation only for electricity companies. Now it is renewable consumption obligation which is applicable to every company. So now Government of India mandated, and it has issued notification also. It says by 2030 in staggered manner, every year it will rise, and by 2030 you will have 43.33%. Whatever consumption you are doing, it has to be from renewable sources of energy. Whatever feedstock you are feeding in your company or discom, or whatever energy electricity distribution company is purchasing, 43.33% has to be renewable energy. So if you understand these four magical words, you can implement it anywhere across the world. If it is little complex, don't worry. Our foundation has created a free resource. So we have a YouTube channel which is free for everyone. It is called Energy Dialogue with Raj Singh Niranjan. So if you go to Energy Dialogue with Raj Singh Niranjan, it is free, all the channels, because these are all complex issues. So you can understand one by one all the issues. Now, independent regulatory commissions, the state electricity regulator, but then for all these measures, whether it is renewable purchase obligation, whether it is renewable energy certificate, whether it is renewable consumption obligation, they are enforced by state electricity regulatory commission, local enforcement. So it becomes super easy. Brilliant exercise India has done, and this is work in progress. So thank you for inviting me. Maybe you can continue the dialogue.
So thank you, Raj, for sharing this, the four magical words. I think that has been very helpful. I'm sure the audience will, understand this kind of the puzzle that you talked about, and how like this pieces, individual pieces are really critical in terms of achieving this energy transition. I would like to come back to you to talk a bit more about how independence is maintained, and how they really do this effective oversight to all these four pieces that you talked about. But before that, I think there is a question, and I see Mandeep has already responded in terms of what metrics or indicators oversight agencies are working on in different aspects of this oversight. But apart from Mandeep's intervention, if anybody wants to come in, because I think that is a question important for all the oversight agencies.
I'm happy to respond to that, Piyush, if useful.
Yeah, over to you again.
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. Thanks for asking that. From an anti-corruption lens and a transparency lens, I think one type of metrics that could be used also is the extent to which countries are being transparent when it comes to the information related to their energy, renewable energy projects. And I mentioned this earlier. There has to be a level of transparency when it comes to the licenses and contracts that are being granted. There has to be a level of transparency when it comes to the revenues that are being collected from these projects, and how are these revenues being managed so that to ensure that citizens and communities are benefiting from them. We know that a lot of these companies are paying directly to subnational governments and communities. There are some subnational payments or transfers that are being devolved to communities. All of this need to be transparent so that the communities who will be impacted most by all of these renewable energy projects could assess, one, are they benefiting from these projects? And two, what are the risks that these projects are posing on them that they need to be aware of? So from a transparency level, there are some metrics. The EITI standard is one. We do have requirements on transparency for the entire value chain in the extractive sector, which also could mirror some of the transparency requirements that should be applied in the renewable energy sector. And lastly, very important, and I'm glad that Mandeep mentioned this earlier, civic space is very important because we in EITI, we also know that you cannot have an effective governance of natural resources or of the renewable energy sector for that matter without the participation of civil society. So you also need to look at the extent to which they are able to freely operate, freedom of assembly, speech, participation in public decision making, and there are metrics to assess this as well.
Thank you, Gay. Thanks, Nina. Do you want to say something on this, like indicators, like how this consumer protection commissions at the national level, like do they have some kind of indicators to measure this consumer protection or empowerment?
Sure. Yeah. So that's definitely a key activity of a lot of our members is tracking participation. I think again comes up as number one indicator. How many opportunities have been given for civil society to submit to proposals or to attend decision-making forums. But another thing I would add is that I think actually a really critical piece is actually calling for the more rigorous monitoring and evaluation of projects. So actually demanding that when funding goes out into these new projects, what is the wraparound process for tracking whether the objectives are actually being met? What are the outcomes for the communities that are directly affected? So not just tracking whether money reached its source or how many gigawatts were installed, but actually what was the effect for the local community? Did it generate new jobs, or did it remove jobs? Did it create new sources of income or damage them? You know, that's actually the sorts of metrics that we need to be tracking with every project, and that's not happening often enough.
Thank you, Nina. There was another question, Mandeep. I wanted to come to you on the role of oversight agencies and the linkage with the development of innovative financing, you know, what role oversight agencies play, and also adding kind of local communities in this energy value chain. So maybe because you also represent this, you know, the civil society organization, I know CSOs are doing a lot in terms of bringing the communities and the people into this the value chain. But if you want to make that kind of linkage, how oversight agencies work in this space?
Well, thank you, Piyush, and also agreeing, you know, with what Nina and Gay mentioned earlier. So one thing which is the outcome of our current market-driven discourse around the world is the tight overlap that exists between political and economic elites around the world. So, you know, you have in almost every country politicians with extensive business interests, and you have people with extensive business interests coming into politics because the revolving door. So this oftentimes can lead to, you know, networks of patronage really steamrolling the rights of local communities, particularly indigenous people, particularly the small holding farmers, etc. And in this situation, it's absolutely critical, I would say, is that, you know, in independent media, independent civil society organizations, their role is absolutely critical in ensuring people's agency. So I think people need to have agency to ensure that there's financing, ensure that governments take interest in the best interest of, you know, people, particularly those who are excluded, rather than those who hold asymmetric powers. So I would say there's a real need for government regulation also in this work, so that we don't have a situation where, you know, corporations, some of whose GDP exceeds that of the revenue of small countries, in a sense, you know, are able to really have their way to the detriment of local communities that have lived on land and subsist of natural resources for generations. So those things all need to be kept in mind as we, you know, make a transition that is just, that's inclusive, and that leaves no one behind.
Thank you, Mandeep. Raz, a follow-up question for you is, if you can reflect a bit on the the appellate tribunal, role of appellate tribunal, and what are the learnings India had, maybe have for other countries, in terms of independence, and how it can be helpful in terms of ensuring more effective and just energy transition. And if you can just maybe connect a bit about the broader judicial system, right? Not just this independent electricity regulatory commissions, but the broader judicial system, the role of courts and judges and lawyers, do they have a role to play in this energy transition?
Excellent.
So brief,
Excellent
if you can
question.
talk about.
So we have independent regulatory commission. So what is the benefit of that independence? If there is a change of government, the energy transition does not change. One of the best things. So what happens? The powers of the government are transferred through the act of parliament to a regulatory body, and that regulatory body enforces renewable purchase obligation. So what happens? Whatever government comes into the power, this political uncertainty does not affect energy transition. It may have positive impacts, but it will not derail the energy transition. So in India, we have independent regulatory commission. So because India is a federal country, we have state level government and central level government. So what we did under Electricity Act, we created 2 levels of regulatory commission. I cannot say 2 levels equal. Powers of Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, we have 1, and we have 26 State Electricity Regulatory Commission and Joint Electricity Regulatory Commission. So 3 Joint Electricity Regulatory Commission, all 3 together are independent regulatory commission for India. Their powers are equal, but functions are different. Mainly, enforcement of renewable purchase obligation is done by State Electricity Regulatory Commission. So if you are not satisfied with whatever energy transition, whatever renewable energy certificate or activities are doing, you can file an appeal to Appellate Tribunal of Electricity and then appeal directly to the Supreme Court of India. So this is the hierarchy, and Supreme Court of India was maybe in the world, it was the first courts which gave the principles of sustainable development. So 1985, Supreme Court gave the test of sustainable development. So any activity government or private entity has to do, it has to follow the test of sustainable development. In 1996, it gave the principle of polluter pays principle. So if you are polluting, you have to pay for whatever pollution you have done. In 1999, Supreme Court gave the principle of precautionary principle. So precautionary principle is very simple. If you have 2 ways of doing something, do the method which is more sustainable and good for the society. It may have more cost, no worries. The Supreme Court is very clear on that. Then it gave the principle of payment of compensation for ecological loss. So polluter pays principle on one side and payment of compensation for ecological on both sides. So from the highest court of India, this concept flows actually. And if we talk specifically of renewable purchase obligation or energy transition, 4 institutions are very important. One institution is Electricity Regulatory Commission, which we have discussed. Second institution, and very interesting institution, is Electricity Ombudsman. So I think so India was, if you all may, because Nina is also working for consumer matters, you can also correct me, but I think India was the first country to implement the concept of Electricity Ombudsman in the world under Electricity Act. So any consumer who has any prosumer means if you have a solar panel in your rooftop, you are producing renewable energy, and if you have any issue with the government, go to Electricity Ombudsman, they will resolve it. And what my research shows, that after India implemented the concept of Electricity Ombudsman, then 2006 Queensland, Australia implemented the concept of Energy Ombudsman. In 2006 France also implemented the concept of National Energy Ombudsman. Then in 2007 UK also implemented the concept of Energy Ombudsman. So I want to be happy to say that maybe we were the first one, but Nina maybe correct me if there are some other countries which have implemented. And the best part, I would like to tell Mandeep, the best part is that the electricity consumer has a choice. You can go to Electricity Ombudsman, but if you want to go to normal consumer courts, go to there. It is okay. Concurrent jurisdiction. The consumers have all the choices to move forward. Finally, 2010, there was new act which created a National Green Tribunal, NGT, which is also doing substantial work for sustainable development and energy transition. So these are the four institutions which are very important. Besides the Supreme Court judgment, Supreme Court judgment is like law. So all the regulatory institutions have to implement. They are free to implement it as and when they want. And best thing is, because independent regulatory commission, so the energy transition process does not stop. It may become little slow or fast, but it will not stop in India. So hope this is useful for all the panelists. Back to you, Piyush.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for really bringing this kind of ombudsman perspective. I think this is really critical, especially now we are talking about this. How do you talk about this speed and scale? In terms of energy transition, because there is a limited time, right?
And continuity.
Exactly.
Scale, but it should not be like the government changes and maybe everything drops off. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
There's a question. I think I would maybe put it as a more general question in terms of more government intervention, more regulatory intervention. Is kind of, it may derail the process. How do you see that? Oversight is also critical, but putting more oversight, it may also be a kind of, it can slow the process, right? How do you see this in terms of the linkage, because private sector also need to come in, again, I just mentioned the speed and scale that we need to talk about. How do you see that, the different stakeholders need to work together to really accelerate the process, but the government system doesn't act as a barrier into this, in terms of the regulations or the oversight that we're talking about? Anyone, if you want to take it, any reflection?
And perhaps just to add a small point, noting that many players in this sector are state-owned enterprises. So how does oversight entities govern state-owned enterprises that are in the generation, distribution, transmission as well? So how would oversight play within government entities? Just to add that perspective. Thank you.
Right. So you want me to speak?
Who wants to go?
Yeah.
Nina is putting, maybe we can take Nina first and then Raz.
Sure. Yeah, happy to say a few words on that. I mean, I think having worked inside government, I can sympathise with that sentiment of the sort of concern about unnecessary layers of complexity. But I do think there's a critical role for government in all of this, and certainly, and Raj has mentioned it, the role of regulatory bodies hold a special space at arm's length from government that can provide that continuity and a little bit sort of holding government's feet to the fire. But yes, private sector has the ability to be very agile, to respond very quickly to new issues as they arise and opportunities. So I definitely think there is a role for the private sector. I mean, consumers organisations have typically sort of positioned themselves in opposition to the private sector, I think, traditionally, to sort of check that those profit motives are not overshadowing consumer interest. But I think in this day and age, especially in the energy sector, a lot of private enterprises are seeing the opportunities, that actually seeing this shift towards a more consumer-centric energy system, there's going to be a need to, we're shifting to seeing more energy as a service type business models, where the private sector is acknowledging that actually there's going to be a back and forth with consumers, and we're going to need to build new models that allow for that. I think there are some really interesting energy as a service models coming through from the private sector, and I think certainly at Consumers International we're starting to explore the ways that we can actually partner with the private sector to leverage not only the finance that's available in that sector, but also the agility, and partner, because we know that they're getting smarter about needing to engage their customers and get on board with a culture of sustainability and participation. So I definitely think there's opportunity there.
In my view, regulatory oversight is must, compulsory. Reason being, energy sector is natural monopoly. So regulatory oversight is important. It cannot be free for all. The certain portions of energy sector, so for example, distribution of electricity and transmission of electricity, they are not natural monopoly. So without tariff determination, consumers will not get protected. So this regulatory commission is essential, number one. Secondly, talking about entrepreneurs, because Umado was talking about entrepreneur. This is a huge opportunity for entrepreneur. It is, billions of dollars. This entrepreneur should not miss this opportunity of energy transition. Why I say? Because of right to energy. If you see, certain statistics point out 2-3 things. Number one, approximately 1 billion people do not have electricity. It is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to provide electricity to them. Some figures also say that around 3 billion people across the world do not have clean fuel to cook food. So this is also a huge opportunity. So hope this is useful to everyone. Yeah, Piyush, go ahead.
Thank you, Raj. Mandeep, for your quick intervention on this.
So I would just, second what Raj has just said about the responsibility of government to ensure, that there's regulatory oversight. I mean, it all comes down to the social contract between the citizen and the state, right? Everybody pays taxes, direct and indirect, to the state. And in response to that, state is supposed to provide certain basic services. Unfortunately, what is happening is the states are oftentimes outsourcing their basic responsibilities to private actors driven by profit motive and without adequate regulation. So which means that those who can afford it, these services, and they are able to buy themselves out of that social contract, and those who can't are then left behind, and is leading to the eye-watering levels of global inequality that we see at the moment. We are we are almost at 19th century levels of inequality, where people have so much that some people can afford to send through private means rockets into space, and where people don't have enough food to eat. So I think we also need to really reinforce what is the responsibility of the state. And I also want us to point to SDG 16, which is to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory and representative decision making at all levels. So the Sustainable Development Goals framework, which is a universal framework, which is a comprehensive framework, is absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandeep. Thank you for making that linkage. Yeah, SDG 16, 17 is really, really critical when we are talking about SDG 7. Before I go for this closing 30 seconds message, maybe just because there is a question, I don't want to ignore that question. Very important question in terms of data. How data collection and processing and use, and how we ensure the transparency in that data. Like especially maybe you can talk about from the corruption lens. If you have some perspective.
Yes, indeed. So I think oversight agencies, including anti-corruption agencies, for example, should demand timely, reliable, granular data in the renewable energy sector. Because the moment there's information asymmetry, that lends the entire landscape vulnerable to corruption. So there should be information sharing. There should be transparency by default in terms of data on the different stages of the value chain that I mentioned earlier. And more importantly, oversight agencies or anti-corruption agencies should develop a systematic way of analyzing where the corruption risks are. What are the areas that are most vulnerable to corruption? And there are already countries that are doing this. For example, Malawi developed an anti-corruption strategy in the extractive sector along with their anti-corruption bureau. Philippines is looking at the risks in the nickel value chain in anticipation of the increase in demand for nickel because of the increase in renewable energy projects. So I think the responsibility is really on these oversight agencies to demand information, make sure systems are in place for information sharing, and more importantly, to also make sure that there's a multi-stakeholder process where different constituencies from government, companies, and civil society are working together to understand and analyze the data and information that they are looking at, because that will enable a data-driven approach to formulation of policies in the renewable energy sector.
Thank you, Gay. Thanks very much. And we have, just last 3 minutes. I want to take maybe just one key message, closing message that you want to give to audience from the area that you are working on. Any last reflection? So to start with, maybe start with you, Raz.
Excellent. So since 3 billion people approximately across the world do not have access to clean fuel to cook food, if we can all work towards solarization of cooking food, that will be huge success, and it will help the environment also, because people, as of now, people are cooking food using cow dung cake and wood. And if you want to prevent cutting of trees, you provide them alternative sources, and the best source is sun. So that is my message, and thank you for inviting. Go ahead.
Thanks, Raj. Over to you, Nina, for your 30 seconds message.
Sure, thank you. I think I would reiterate, that we want to see a fast, fair, and accountable energy transition. We talked about how critical participation is, that it happens early in decision-making processes. And then I think I could perhaps just add 3 specific ideas around how to increase consumer representation. So one is picking up on those business models that we talked about. Sorry, something's just popped up on my screen. Okay. Supporting business models that actually, by design, are looking to protect and empower consumers and assist them to manage upfront costs. The other one is actually direct employment of people who understand consumer issues, social scientists, consumer specialists in energy companies, in policy departments and other organizations. And then the third, I think, picks up on our discussion as well, which is that we have to do much better job of measuring and tracking the impacts of the energy transition on consumers with the sorts of indicators that we discussed. Final word would be just to say that, for us, it's not just about protecting consumers, it's actually about harnessing their power to be a driver in the energy transition.
Very important. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nina. Mandeep, over to you.
I'd just like to emphasize the importance of civic space along with technically sound policies, because we must remember that policies are made for people, and people must not be deprived of their agency. They must have the right to be involved in the decisions that impact their lives, and especially the excluded. So civic space is absolutely critical to ensure that the benefits of sustainable development reach everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, very much agree. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Gay, over to you for the final words.
Yeah, so I think I want to highlight that the types of corruption risks continue to evolve. They're not static, and they evolve because of the changing landscape of the industry. So in this context, I think the one recommendation I have for overall improvement of energy governance is to strengthen transparency in the sector so that everyone understands the opportunities and, more importantly, the governance risks that we should be aware of, especially, as I mentioned, because these risks continue to evolve.
Thank you. Thanks, Kay. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mandeep, Nina, Raz. Really, thanks very much for your intervention and great discussion. I hope we get a chance to collaborate in the future in these areas. Before I close, Geoffrey, do you have anything?
Well, it's been very interesting. We've covered everything from consumers to prosumers. We've had some excellent nuggets of wisdom from Raj on the 4 magical points on how to get this done. We've gone all the way to the critical minerals conversation and how to ensure that it's safeguarded from corruption. I mean, it's really been quite an interesting discussion. We've covered the breadth of many country examples, and it's been excellent. So thank you so much, panelists. You've been able to bring the discussion on oversight bodies up to practical points that we can quickly be able to program within UNDP. And I think Piyush have also done excellent moderation. So that's all from my end. I've released just a short poll so we can be able to get your feedback on how to structure and prepare these events even better. Take a few seconds and just give us your feedback. It's important as we try and ensure that we respond to your needs in this area. So over to you, Piyush. Perhaps you could bring in Riyad to just give the final statement as we bring this to a close. Thank you.
Is Riyad here? I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe the audience can take a couple of minutes just to fill the survey because this is very important for us. And thank you to all our speakers as well as the audiences for your active participation. Yeah, a lot of good questions. I really appreciate that. Without those questions, wouldn't have been helpful. This insightful discussion. So thank you again. Thanks everyone. And
Great. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.